In 2022, a consumer group asked more than 4,000 British holidaymakers to rank the nation's seaside towns. One resort finished dead last, not near the bottom. Last out of roughly 100, its attractions scoring 1 star out of 5. Here is what makes that ranking strange. The town that came last is the same town that 90 years ago all but invented the British seaside holiday. This is Skegness, the birthplace of Butlins, the home of the most famous seaside poster ever drawn, and somehow the most mocked coast in England. You can measure the fall in the reviews. Visitors describing brown froth on the water, dirty streets, potholed roads, one of them offering nothing but a single word: run. You can measure it in the nicknames the country hangs on the place. Skeg Vegas, the Costa del Skeg, always said with a smirk. But the coldest measure sits on a spreadsheet. The median age in Skegness today is 48, against 40 for England as a whole, with far fewer children than average and far more pensioners. The town built, quite deliberately, to sell a young family its happiest week, by the sea now struggles to convince a young family to come at all. So this is the story of how the most famous resort in Britain became its most ridiculed. And to understand it, you have to grasp something odd about Skegness that almost nobody ever says out loud. It did not grow the slow, accidental way most towns grow, around a harbour or a crossroads or a river. Skegness was invented. It was drawn on paper, priced and put on the market, and from the first line of the first plan, the thing it was truly selling was never a place, it was a feeling. Long before it was bracing, and long before it was ever a joke, Skegness was something else entirely. It was a warning about the sea. The original settlement did not stand where the town stands now. It sat further east beyond the modern shoreline, out where today's day trippers wade without a second thought. It was a small port carrying an Old Norse name for a headland reaching out into the water, and by the 14th century it mattered, a working harbour where boats put in for coastal trade, sheltered from the North Sea by natural banks of sand and shingle. Those banks were the whole reason the port existed, and then, quietly at first and then all at once, they began to fail. Sometime in the 1520s, the very sea the whole future town would one day sell so lovingly to strangers rose up in a great storm and simply took it. The old harbour drowned, wiped off the map, its streets and quays left somewhere out under the grey water, where, 4 centuries later, holidaymakers would paddle with their trousers rolled up, never knowing a town lay beneath their feet. What survived crept inland and shrank into something far humbler. A farming and fishing village of around 350 souls, sitting on some of the richest grazing land in the country, with a couple of hotels and almost no reason for anyone to come. A few men earned their living from the boats, the rest worked the fields and cattle, and for 3 centuries that was the whole of Skegness. A quiet hamlet the sea had already beaten once, keeping its head down and its back to the water, waiting without ever knowing it was waiting. Then, on a July day in 1873, the railway arrived, and everything changed in a single stroke. Most seaside towns grew up first and discovered their tourists afterwards. Skegness did it backwards. The land for miles belonged to one man, the 9th Earl of Scarborough, and when the trains reached the coast, he looked at his own ordinary fields and saw an opportunity nobody else had spotted. So he commissioned a plan. Surveyors laid out a new town on paper, a grid of wide tree-lined avenues and parades, and a main shopping street, superimposed on the old village like a diagram traced over a photograph. The Earl paid, out of his own pocket, for a great seawall built from limestone hauled along the new railway from his own quarry inland. He formed a company to raise a pier, then leased the plots to speculative developers, and let them build his resort street by street. Skegness was a product. Someone designed it, costed it, and brought it to market. And it worked, faster than anyone had dared hope. The people it was built for came from the factory towns of the East Midlands, from Nottingham and Derby and Leicester, from Birmingham, whole streets of them, travelling together when the mills and works shut down for their annual week. They crammed into excursion trains on their one precious week, away from the machines, and poured out at the coast hungry for air and light and salt. On a single August bank holiday in 1882, barely 9 years after the first train, the railway carried 22,000 day trippers into Skegness. 22,000 people in one day spilling off the platforms onto a beach that a decade earlier had belonged to a handful of fishermen and a great many cows. To hold that many bodies and give them something to spend their few coins on, the town built spectacle at speed. In 1881, after a national competition drew 44 designs, Skegness opened a pleasure pier reaching 1,844 feet out over the sand, the fourth longest in England, its ribbon cut by a royal duke. At the far end stood a concert hall, and from it steamboats carried passengers across the water to Norfolk. A clock tower went up near the front to mark a jubilee of the old Queen. Later came the boating lake, the Tower Gardens, an entire foreshore remade into a purpose-built holiday playground of walks and greens and pavilions. But hold that pier in your mind, it is going to matter a great deal later, when the sea comes back for the town a second time. There was even a kind of medicine written into the whole idea. Long before anyone printed a poster, sea air was believed to heal, and the wealthy and the sick were sent to the coast to recover. Convalescent homes rose along the front, some funded by great companies for their own workers, one established by the Countess of Scarborough for women alone. The Derbyshire miners would eventually build their own holiday camp beside their own convalescent home, a working man's slice of recovery, carved out of the same bracing air the gentry breathed. That was the promise underneath every brick of the town. The people who came spent their ordinary lives breathing coal smoke and cotton dust and the sourness of the factory floor. Here, for a few days, they could breathe something clean. Come to Skegness, the place seemed to say, and feel better. And they came, in numbers that kept climbing, decade after decade. The grid the Earl had drawn on paper filled in and spread. Boarding houses lined the new avenues. Amusements crowded the front. And by the years between the two world wars, this manufactured town had become one of the most popular seaside resorts in Britain, a name ordinary families across the Midlands said with real longing whenever the long grey working year finally bent towards summer. The village of 350 had become a machine for happiness, and it was only just getting started. But the thing that truly made Skegness famous, that fixed it in the national imagination for a century, was not the pier, nor the beach, nor the trains. It was a single painting, made by a man who had never once set foot in the place. In 1908, the Great Northern Railway, which needed to fill its trains to the Lincolnshire coast, commissioned a well-known illustrator named John Hassall to produce a poster for Skegness. Hassall had never been. He worked entirely from imagination, and what he drew has become, by common agreement, the most famous holiday advertisement ever made in Britain. A round, jolly fisherman in a sou'wester and thigh boots, a pipe clamped in his mouth, skipping and dancing along an empty golden beach with both arms flung wide, completely and ridiculously happy. There were no landmarks at all, no pier, no hotels, no clock tower, nothing to show you what the town actually looked like, just sea and sand and a fat, joyful man, dancing. And underneath that figure ran 5 short words, supplied by a railway clerk whose name nobody ever thought to write down. Skegness is so bracing. For this, for the image that would define an entire town for more than 100 years, John Hassall was paid 12 guineas, a little over £12. He took the fee, handed over the artwork, and thought almost nothing more about it. It was one commission among thousands in a busy career, and he had no reason to imagine it would outlive everything else he ever made. It has been said, with a good deal of truth, that Skegness rose to fame on a poster. The Jolly Fisherman was reprinted in newspapers the length and breadth of the country, copied and parodied by generation after generation of visitors who kicked up the wet sand in imitation of that ridiculous dance. And the strangest thing of all is the order in which it happened. The poster came first, the reality followed it. People fell in love with an idea of Skegness, a feeling of bracing air and carefree delight dreamed up by a stranger who had never been there, and then climbed onto trains in their thousands to stand inside the advertisement, to check whether the feeling was real. Hassall himself did not visit the town until 1936, nearly 30 years after he had painted its face. He kept the local dignitaries waiting too, because he went to the wrong London station and missed his train, made funnier by the fact that his poster had once included a railway timetable. When he finally arrived, he was gracious about it, Skegness, he said, was even more bracing and attractive than he had been led to expect. Even the man who invented the promise was a little surprised to find the place had lived up to it. And 1936, the year the artist finally saw his fisherman's home in the flesh, was the same year Skegness gave Britain something even larger than a poster. A few miles up the coast at Ingold Mells, a former travelling showman opened a gate, and the modern British holiday walked straight through it. His name was Billy Butlin, and his idea was born, of all things, out of misery. Years earlier, on holiday at Barry Island in Wales, Butlin had been thrown out of his boarding house every morning after breakfast and not let back in until the evening meal. Whatever the weather threw at him, he was left to wander the wet streets all day, with nowhere to shelter and nothing to do. It was standard practice at the time, the ordinary cruelty of the British seaside landlady, and Butlin never forgot how small it made him feel. He resolved that if he ever ran a holiday of his own, nobody would be turned out into the rain. Everything would be included, laid on from the moment they arrived to the moment they left. So he built it, on the flat coast beside Skegness, and it cost him £100,000, something close to 7 million in today's money, a colossal gamble for one man. He placed one half-page advertisement in the Daily Express, promising 3 meals a day and free entertainment, a whole week of it, for the budget an ordinary working family had in its pocket. That advertisement brought in around 10,000 inquiries. By the time the gates first swung open, the camp was already fully booked for the entire season. Butlin had guessed at a hunger buried deep in the country, a longing for a little dignity and a little fun, and the country answered him almost overnight. The first Butlin's holiday camp opened on the 11th of April 1936. The ribbon was cut by Amy Johnson, the aviator who had become the first woman to fly solo from England to Australia, a national celebrity brought in to bless a field full of chalets beside the cold North Sea. Over the entrance ran Butlin's motto, and it told you everything you needed to know about what he was really selling. Our true intent is all for your delight. And on that first night, when the guests seemed shy and stiff, and the evening threatened to collapse into silence, a nervous young engineer climbed up and began cracking jokes to warm the room. The guests loved him. Butlin watched it happen, understood it in an instant, and afterwards dressed his entertainers in bright red blazers so campers could pick them out anywhere in the crowd. The red coat was born, right there at Skegness on the very first night the place opened. What Butlin had built was total, all-inclusive delight, manufactured and delivered on an industrial scale. A week's holiday for a week's pay, the slogan promised, and it came close to honest, priced from around 35 shillings to £3 depending on the season. Inside the fence there were dining halls and ballrooms, outdoor swimming pools with cascades, sports fields and competitions running from breakfast to lights out, knobbly knees contests and glamorous grandmother contests, and every silly joyful thing in between. There was an entire operation devoted to the children, the Beavers Club, so that parents could, perhaps for the first time in their lives, actually sit down and rest. Each camp had its own children's entertainer, and at Skegness it was a man remembered as Uncle Boko, recognisable across the site by his ventriloquist's dummy and his bright red fez. Everyone went home with a Butlin's badge pinned to their coat, a little enamel proof that they had been somewhere and been happy there, and the machine only grew. By its heyday in the 1950s and 60s, it was enormous. The Children's Club alone had signed up more than 200,000 members by 1962. There were several ballrooms in a single camp, because the whole nation went dancing every week in those years, and Butlin gave them somewhere to do it, over and over, all summer long. As the fashions changed, the camp changed with them. Beachcomber bars appeared, dressed as tropical paradises, waitresses in grass skirts serving exotic drinks against a painted backdrop of erupting volcanoes and tropical storms, a fake Pacific island planted on the Lincolnshire coast for people who would never in their lives get near a real one. A monorail was threaded through the Skegness camp so families could glide above it all like something out of the future, escape engineered down to the last detail. It ran, famously, like clockwork. There was a wake-up call over the loudspeakers, a full timetable, redcoats chivying everyone cheerfully from one activity to the next. Critics sneered. They called it regimented, a holiday on rails, a thing fit only for a working class that supposedly did not know how to enjoy its own freedom. But Butlin understood, far better than his critics did, why they were wrong. The families who came to him had no wish to be turned out into the rain and left to fend for themselves, the way he once had been at Barry Island. They wanted, for one glorious week of the year, to be looked after, to have every meal cooked, every child amused, every hour filled, and to pay for it up front so nothing could go wrong and no landlady could throw them out. The guests did not feel regimented. They felt cared for, fussed over, held safe, many for the first time in their adult lives. That was the quiet revolution. Skegness sold to the masses, and the masses adored it for it. This was the summit of the whole story. Working families who had never once been permitted to feel pampered were suddenly waited on, entertained, fussed over and delighted, exactly as the man over the gate had promised. And the country loved it so completely that even a war could only pause it. When the Second World War came, the government took the Skegness camp over and turned it into a naval training base, giving it a warship's name, before it was handed back and reopened to holidaymakers in 1946, the delight simply resuming where it had been forced to leave off. The camp threw off famous faces too. A whole run of redcoats went on to become television stars, the comedian Dave Allen among them, entertainers who learnt their craft warming up a dining hall full of tired families on a wet Lincolnshire evening, and the peak of it produced one small, almost unbelievable footnote. In the summer of 1962, a young Liverpool drummer was working the Butlin season with a band called Rory Storm and the Hurricanes, playing the camp circuit night after night, when a telephone call reached him. Another group wanted him to replace their drummer. He said yes, played out the last of his engagement so as not to leave his bandmates short, and went home to Liverpool to join them. The drummer's name was Richard Starkey, though the world would very soon know him instead as Ringo Starr, and the band that had called him was the Beatles. Several accounts place that particular Butlin season at Skegness itself. If they are right, a man walked into a holiday camp on the Lincolnshire coast, sat behind his drums for the summer crowds, and walked back out onto the road to becoming the most famous drummer alive. A drowned medieval port had become the beating heart of British happiness. Butlin's was now a national institution ringing the whole coast, and in 1972 the business was sold to the Rank organisation for £43 million. The trains were full, the ballrooms packed, the fishermen still dancing on every wall and every postcard in the town, and yet, within a single generation, all of it would begin to come apart. There was no single disaster to point at, no villain to blame. Instead, two much quieter forces went slowly to work on the town, and both turned out to be very nearly impossible to fight. To understand what really killed the British seaside, you have to follow the money first, and then you have to follow the weather. Start with the money, because it moved first. The thing that broke the British seaside was not a scandal or a single catastrophe. It was an aeroplane and a cheaper price. From the 1960s onward, the package holiday arrived and quietly rewrote the whole arithmetic of a family's summer. For not a great deal more than a week at Skegness, a family could now fly all the way to Spain, to the Mediterranean, and get the one thing the cold Lincolnshire coast had never once been able to honestly promise anybody: reliable sun. The very same families who had built Skegness up, queued for Butlins, danced in its ballrooms and pinned on the little badges, discovered almost overnight that the bracing North Sea air John Hassall had painted so lovingly was, in plain truth, quite often just cold. Bracing had always been a kindly word for a wind that cut straight through you, and once warmth abroad became affordable, bracing stopped being a selling point and became a punchline. People started to call the place the Costa del Skeg, and they were not being kind when they said it. Then came the weather. While the crowd slowly began to thin, the sea did exactly what it had done 400 years before, in the 1520s. It came back for the town. On the night of the 31st of January, 1953, a deep storm moving down the North Sea collided with a high spring tide, and the water rose more than 3 meters higher than anyone had thought possible. Soon after dark, along the whole Lincolnshire coast, the sea overtopped the defences and then breached them in more than 100 places, and the flood poured for miles inland through the freezing night. It came so fast and so quietly that people barely understood what was happening. In one account, a man at a birthday party in a seafront cafe was asked whether he wanted his car, and when he asked why, he was told it had just floated past the window. Mablethorpe, Sutton-on-Sea and Skegness were among the very worst hit places in the country. In Lincolnshire alone, 43 people drowned that night. 26 were over 70, pensioners trapped in their own homes by water they never saw coming. Across England, the disaster killed more than 300 people before morning. A reconnaissance plane sent up the following afternoon photographed Billy Butlin's holiday camp, birthplace of the redcoat and all that manufactured joy, sitting silent and abandoned beneath a flat grey sheet of floodwater. The town that had made its whole fortune selling the sea had been reminded, once again, of exactly what the sea could take. The water was not finished with Skegness even then. Remember the pier, the proud 1,844-foot pier, the fourth longest in England, its concert hall out over the waves. In 1978, a severe storm drove into it and ripped the far end clean away, leaving the concert hall stranded out in the water, cut off from the shore, unreachable by anyone. For years, the severed pierhead sat out there in the North Sea, too expensive to reconnect and too costly to remove, slowly rotting in the salt, becoming a lonely roost for starlings. When the town finally moved to demolish it in the mid-1980s, a fire broke out during the work and finished off what the storm had started. A pier that had once run nearly 2,000 feet out over the sea was left at just 387. For a while, all that stood where the concert hall had been were the bare cast iron stanchions, rusting out of the water like the ribs of something enormous that had died there. Skegness had lost 4/5 of its grandest structure in a single lifetime, and the missing part was never rebuilt. It was the perfect image for what was happening to the whole town, slowly, all through those years. Nothing dramatic enough to make the national news. Just a steady, grinding loss of grandeur. A resort quietly coming apart at the edges while the country looked the other way, toward the airport. By then the town was visibly tired, and even Butlin's, the jewel that had made its name, was straining. As overseas competition bit and costs climbed, the great camp was reinvented and rebranded, losing its proud old name for a time and reopening in 1987 as something called Fun Coast World, a slick modern label for a place that had once simply been the first Butlins in the world. It was the kind of change that tells you everything. A town so unsure of what it now was that it started to rename the very thing that had made it famous. Which brings us, at last, to Skegness today, and a genuine puzzle. Because here is the strange thing. The beach at Skegness is not actually bad. In 2023, its central stretch of sand was awarded a blue flag, the international mark of a clean, safe, well-managed beach. 4 million people still visit every year. On a warm summer's day, the resident population of around 21,000 swells to 250,000. By any honest measure, the sand and the water are perfectly fine, and the crowds have not vanished. So why has the whole country decided that Skegness is a joke? The answer has almost nothing to do with the beach. In survey after survey, when that consumer group asked its holidaymakers to grade the nation's resorts, Skegness came last, or joint last, again and again. An overall satisfaction score of just 48%, the lowest of any resort in the country. Its attractions, its seafront, its shops, all rated a single star out of 5. The written reviews were merciless. Visitors complained of brown froth on the water, of dirty streets and potholed roads, of a place they swore they would never set foot in again. And one of them, as we heard at the start, gave other holidaymakers exactly one word of advice: run. And underneath the mockery sits something heavier than hurt feelings. Skegness is not simply unfashionable, Skegness is poor. A major study in 2020 identified it as the third most deprived area in the whole of England and Wales. Government and statistical reviews have repeatedly ranked it the most deprived seaside resort in England, scoring badly on income, employment, health, education, on nearly every measure there is. The local economy runs almost entirely on tourism, which means low-wage, low-skill, seasonal work that disappears the moment the summer ends. The town lives two separate lives across a single year. In the warm months, it is a heaving 250,000 people, loud and neon and crammed, kept moving by an army of seasonal workers who arrive and leave with the season. In the cold months, it empties back to its 21,000, the pensioners, the shuttered fronts. That churn breeds instability of every kind, economic and social both, boom crashing into bust twice a year. And the town has grown old. That median age of 48 sits well above the national 40, with far fewer children and far more pensioners than the country as a whole. The place that was built, from the very first drawing, to sell young families their happiest week, has quietly become a place young families now drive straight past, on their way somewhere with a guarantee of sun. None of this has gone unnoticed, and it would be unfair to pretend the town has given up. There have been regeneration plans and government funding pots, promises to fix the seafront and the shops and the tired old fabric, efforts to give Skegness some reason to exist beyond the 12 frantic weeks of summer. New owners took over the pier with grand talk of restoring it to its full lost length. But the deeper problem is not one of buildings or budgets. It is a problem of desire. You cannot regenerate a feeling. You cannot pass a grant that makes a 19-year-old dream of a bracing week on the cold North Sea the way their great-grandparents did, not when the same money buys a flight to somewhere warm. The young simply stopped wanting what Skegness was built to give, and no amount of fresh paint on the front has yet found a way to change that. And here is the deepest irony of the story, the thing that turns a simple decline into something genuinely, quietly sad. Skegness did not fail by betraying what it was. It failed by being completely and faithfully exactly what it had always been built to be. Every seaside cliché the country now finds faintly embarrassing. The penny arcades, the flashing neon, the kiss-me-quick hats, the donkey rides, the fish and chips eaten out of paper in a biting wind. Skegness still does all of it, more wholeheartedly than almost anywhere else in Britain. It is, you could fairly argue, not the worst seaside town in the country, but the most seaside town in the country. It perfected a feeling, and then the nation slowly fell out of love with that feeling and left the town standing there, still performing it, still bracing, still dancing, for an audience that keeps shrinking and greying with every passing year. So the real tragedy of Skegness is not that people stopped coming, because 4 million still do. The tragedy is that the town became a living museum of a happiness that Britain decided it had outgrown. It cannot stop being the thing that once made the whole country adore it, even now that the same country has turned it into a punchline. And Butlin's is still there, on the coast at Ingoldsmells, still open, marking 90 years since Amy Johnson cut that ribbon, still promising its guests all for their delight, holding its ground against a tide that turned decades ago. So go back one final time to that poster, the jolly fisherman dancing along an empty beach with his arms thrown wide, painted in 1908 by a man who had never once been near the place, selling 5 simple words to a country that could not resist them. Skegness is so bracing. He is still there, you know. The fisherman is the town's mascot to this day, printed on the signs and statues and cheap souvenirs all along the front. He is still dancing, still delighted, still promising the same bracing, carefree, all-inclusive escape he first promised more than 100 years ago. He has not aged a single day. The promise never changed, only we did. Skegness was always an advertisement that somehow taught itself to stand up and become a town, a feeling sold so well that it conjured a whole resort out of empty grazing land beside a hungry sea. And the cruel thing about building a town on a feeling is that you never get to decide how long the world goes on wanting to feel it. The train stopped running full, the sun moved to Spain, and the fisherman just kept on dancing. If this story stayed with you, do the old fisherman a small favour and subscribe, because Britain is full of places like Skegness, towns that rose and fell on the strength of a single promise, and this channel tells their stories one at a time. And if you like this video, YouTube also thinks you're going to like this one on your screen. Go on, give it a click.